Hi, everyone, and welcome again to another episode of GaudiMetSpiz22.com. I'm really loading up on podcasts these days. I did one with Gavin Ashenden a few days ago, which proved to be very controversial, and I've gotten a lot of feedback, both pro and con, on that one. So I want to say I did temporarily delete it and then reposted it because I wanted to add some comments and so forth to add some nuance to my own perspectives on things. And I just want to say, I love Gavin. I don't agree with everything he said on the video, but I agree with 95% of what he said. And so that 5%, though, is important. And next week, I'm having another guest on to sort of give a different perspective on things. And it certainly won't be a knock on Gavin, since I really appreciated him coming on the show. But it was a very controversial topic, and I acknowledge that. Anyway, today that's neither. I interviewed Father Jonathan Nepple yesterday out in Colorado, and that will be getting posted very soon. Today, I have a repeat customer, my cohort in crime, my frequent podcast guest, the one, the only Kale Zelden, friend of Rod Dreher, used to do the General Eclectic podcast with Rod Dreher back in Dreher's days with the American Conservative and so on. So Kale is a teacher of English literature at Portsmouth Abbey in Rhode Island, which is really a highfalutin school for highfalutin
Fancy,
intellects.
fancy. Yes.
Fancy, fancy. So welcome, Kale.
It's great to be here, Larry. Thank you so much for having me on. I did, in fact, catch your conversation with Gavin, and I should point out that, one of the reasons why I think we do these podcasts is certainly looking for areas of agreement, but also looking for areas where, we might have differences of opinion and takes. And so I don't think you should be too worried about the controversy with Gavin. Having the next guest on to sort of maybe offer a different perspective is great, but hopefully it's not too much out of the fryer and into the frying pan with me. But anyway, I'm excited to be back here,
No, and I
right in the
want to
middle of
reiterate.
winter. It's like, what else can we do, Larry, but talk?
Yeah, that's true. And I want to reiterate a big thank you to Gavin for coming on
Oh
the
yeah,
show.
yeah,
I love Gavin Ashenden. I think he's highly intelligent and articulate. I think he's on the side of the angels. But it is a controversial topic, and I
yeah,
acknowledge that. And
yeah.
and I think even Gavin would acknowledge that. And so we need to, because he's a gentleman. Gavin is many things, and one of the things he
Yes.
is a real gentleman. And I thank him for coming on the show. But anyway, yes. There are so many things I have to say to the viewers and listeners. I texted Kale the other day and said, "Help! I'm having Kale Zelden withdrawal. I need to have Kale back on the show because we always have, I think, such really fun conversations." Now, you said to me off camera that we're going to talk about many things today, but you wanted to lead off with a discussion of dreams, of
Yeah, I
all
do.
things.
Yeah, dreams. It's funny. I was thinking the other day, and the reason why I brought up is I woke up this morning and I had a bad dream, and we can talk about that in a minute. And it has sort of cast a pall on me this morning, and sort of conceptually, but I've always been interested in dreams, and I think it is curious to me that we have gone in the span of about 100 years, maybe 80, 75 years, let's call it. We've gone from thinking that dreams were everything to dreams are nothing. And I know experientially that dreams are something, but I'm not entirely sure what they are. And the reason why I say that dreams are something is that everyone knows that when you wake up and you sort of have a flash quick memory of what you've been dreaming about, it has an ability to influence your entire day or maybe the morning.
Yes.
And so I'm curious as to sort of your take on what do you think dreams are? There's a long
Yeah.
sort of tradition of this, but also how is it that we've gone from thinking or sort of collectively seeing dreams as being substantially important to essentially just
Yeah.
noise?
Let me just start by saying that I share your fascination with dreams,
Yeah.
but they are strange things, right? Some dreams are very that you remember them and you remember them your whole life. I can still
Yeah.
remember a couple of dreams I had as a
Yeah.
child, like age 8, age 9, and I still think about those dreams.
Yeah.
And yet other dreams, which are very vivid and very intense,
Mhm.
30 seconds after you're awake, you say, "Okay, I know I was sweating all night with this
Yeah.
crazy dream." But
Yeah.
now I can't for the life of me remember one piece of it. So it is a strange thing just with regard to whether or not they're very ephemeral and fade quickly, or whether or not they stay with you.
Right.
That to me is strange. But
Yeah.
I do think, you go back to biblical times and God spoke to people in dreams,
I mean,
and I
it's
still
all over scripture. It's
it's all
just
over
it's
Scripture.
unavoidable in scripture.
Well, part of it too is I think that what ancient people understood, and I agree with this assessment, what ancient people understood is that when you go to sleep, sleeping is a kind of miniature death in some
Yeah.
ways,
Yeah. Yeah.
because your conscious mind is, in a sense, subdued, and some other aspect of you, the sleep side of you, the subconscious side of you, comes out. And so that subduing of the conscious self is like a miniature death. And
Yeah.
so ancient peoples, I think, rightly believed that there's a kind of thinning of the veil between the
Yeah.
natural and the supernatural in sleep, which is why God speaks to us in sleep. The other thing that I would say about dreams is that what they highlight is the deeply, and we don't appreciate this enough as modern people, the deeply symbolic nature of our thinking.
Yeah.
That what so often, which is why, sometimes you go to a psychotherapist to analyze your dreams,
Yeah.
because the fact is, there are certain stock symbols that almost all human beings have in certain dreams that actually symbolize and means, like the experience of showing up at work and you forgot to put your clothes on.
That's right. The classic. Yeah.
You're walking around at school or work in your underwear, and you're like, "How the hell did this?" Or the experience of falling from a height,
Yeah.
and in a dream. These are all very common aspects of dreaming that I think have, it's your subconscious mind's way of symbolically talking about something. Now, all that said, I also think there's obviously a biological side to dreams, and not
Mhm.
just a spiritual side.
Mhm.
And some dreams, I think, really are just random neuronal firings in the synapses of the brain, so that, I'm at the supermarket and all of a sudden I'm talking to a chimpanzee that's buying
Yeah.
coffee, and you realize, what the hell does that mean? Yeah.
Yeah.
And you realize it doesn't mean anything. It's just sort of random, your brain, in a sense, cleansing itself of random shit that's
Yeah.
piled up. Because part
Yeah.
of sleeping is your brain is regenerating itself.
Right.
And so
Right.
it's cleaning things out, the
Yeah.
flotsam and the jetsam. Anyway, that's my take.
Yeah, so there's this kind of like a stacking and sorting mechanism maybe that goes on
Yeah.
when you sleep. And I think that being awake has certain advantages, right? And one of the advantages is that being awake and aware, kind of keeps you alive. But but I think it's probably important if we think about the what are the advantages of dreaming. And it seems to me that our conscious minds order the world in a specific kind of useful way. And our sleeping minds seem to order the world in some kind of symbolic way, which is, I think, is what you're getting at. And if you think about, every dream is a visit to the underworld, metaphorically speaking here, of course.
Yeah.
And therefore, well, what do you get in the underworld? Well, the underworld is a place of, communion with the dead. The underworld is a place where you go to receive wisdom that, is elusive in your day-to-day conscious, getting and spending, going about your business sort of way. And therefore, dreaming opens you up to something else. But I think you're right. When you look at the way that dreams function in the scriptures, they seem to be this place of alternative instruction that the spirit world, the angels and God and his messengers have no compunction about using. In fact, it seems to me, especially if you look at somebody like Saint Joseph, um, Jesus's stepfather, you know, important uh, just put it mildly, important things are conveyed to Joseph in that specific realm, which in essence keeps Jesus alive.
Yeah.
It keeps Joseph and Mary connected. It inspires the dreams inspire Joseph to leave and to flee to Egypt. These are not insignificant moments, and it strikes me that the gospel writers, um, you know, employ this kind of sort of dream mechanism. So,
Yeah.
why do you think we don't pay attention to dreams anymore?
I think because of scientific materialism, reductionism, I think that we've bought into a vision of the mind as nothing more than excretions of the brain. That
Yeah,
the brain excretes thought the way the liver excretes bile.
interesting.
And mind is utterly nothing more than the epiphenomenal byproduct. Consciousness is just the epiphenomenal byproduct of neuronal synaptical brain chemistry and brain electricity.
So,
And
in
yet,
biological terms, we would call that a spandrel, right? The dreams are
yeah,
these things that we just sort of
exactly.
do as a secondary or third knockoff effect of some other essential functioning.
Yeah, and I think though that even amongst those who buy into a purely atheistic, materialistic
Yep.
understanding of mind as reducible to brain,
Yep.
I think there would be a small segment of that population that would still say that dreams are important from a psychological and personal existential perspective, because it is your brain, in a sense, cleaning itself out, yes, in a sort of sorting mechanism, as you say, but it could also be your subconscious mind is trying to, in a sense, bring something into the conscious mind that you need to pay attention to. Despite, however, such people, I think the vast majority of modern human beings have simply so bought into a reductionistic account that they wake up and say, "Oh, that was a weird dream."
Yeah.
They could have a dream about well, I'm going to go back to my youth. Okay,
Yeah. Go ahead.
the dream that I remember was I was my bedroom as a kid was in our basement. My father had finished our basement
Yeah.
and five kids in a little cracker box house, and I
Yeah.
had a
Yeah.
little
Yeah. Yeah.
basement room. And in order to get to the adjacent bathroom, I had to walk through this little hallway. And there were two doors, a door on either side. Now, hearing other people's dreams bores people, so I'll get to
No.
the
No.
point,
No.
which is, in my dream, I got out of bed to go use the bathroom, and I went into this corridor, and I noticed Jesus was standing in front of the door leading to the bathroom. And I felt this overwhelming sense of fear in the
Mm,
dream, an
mm,
overwhelming sense of fear. So I turned around to walk back to my bed, and blocking the entrance to the other door was his mother, Mary.
mm, mm.
And the two of them then converged upon me and embraced me
Wow.
and said to me that you are going to do our will. And
Wow.
I and I woke up and I was crying and I was sweating,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it was an intense experience, and it's something I've never forgotten, and it's
Mm,
been with me my entire life. And so when I think a lot of modern people, when they have an experience like that, to go back to your original question,
yeah.
have a tendency to say, "Oh, geez, that must have been the pepperoni pizza I had for supper,"
Yeah. Yeah.
creating some bizarre image in my brain. And quite frankly, I dismissed it initially too as a young man, saying, "Oh, this is just my brain playing tricks on me.
Yeah.
I did not really have an encounter with Christ and his mother. Don't be stupid, Larry.
Yeah.
Don't be so narcissistic. Don't be so
Right.
egotistical as to think that
Yeah.
Jesus and Mary would come to you in a dream."
Right.
And
Who am
yet,
I? Who am I?
who am I? But as I aged and matured, and that dream stuck with me, and I had it again, like 3 years
Mm,
later, the exact same dream,
mm.
I began to realize maybe God is speaking to me in this dream. But I think a lot of modern people would just dismiss such things.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. It just seems like the salience with which we process a dream is a tell. And what I mean by that is, like, so this morning I woke up when I had a bad dream. Not a nightmare, right? Not a slasher, nothing like that, but a bad dream.
Hang on a sec. Yeah, go ahead. I'm listening.
And you know, I I was being told that, and I would say that this was a dream. If again, a sort of rough character, bad dreams, good dreams. Like this is a bad dream, and it's a dream that was trying to convince me that I was wasting my time and that I was getting, you know, I was delusional, and I was trying to go beyond my small little world, and that, who do I think I am to think that, I can, be something more. That was kind of the gist of
Yeah.
it. And and so I woke up and I was really bummed, I was really bummed, and I, I don't want to believe that. I don't believe it, I guess, but I'm haunted by it, right? I'm haunted by the. Now, you could say that this is just a projection of Kale's self-doubt, and you can kind of play all that game, but I don't know why, if it's nothing, it can have such a power over me, and so I was, and I don't, I'm having a hard time conveying, but I'm struggling with it even right now.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
it is very easy for me to, in my conscious thinking, to say, yeah, this is for lack of a better way to say it, this is a demonic dream. In other words, what I mean by that is, not a snarling guy with a red pitchfork and red tights and a pointy beard and horns, but demonic in the sense of um, trying to rip out my heart and rip out my desire, rip out my ambition, rip away my sense that I'm being called to be something greater or heroic or something like that. And so, so I'm fighting it hard today, and it's
Yeah.
just it's just strange to say, oh well, that was just Kale, you had a piece of bad potato, as Scrooge says in A Christmas Carol when he is confronted with Jacob Marley for the first time. It's like, no, 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 I don't think it's just a piece of bad potato. In
Yeah.
fact, it is giving voice to those demonic voices that all of us hear when we are being talked out of our vocation.
Oh, absolutely. And it is amazing to me the extent to which a really bad negative dream like that one can
Yeah,
truly alter your mood for the rest
yeah.
of the day.
Oh, yeah.
Sometimes even longer. Uh,
Right.
I think we've all too had the experience of a dream that is so real. It's a negative dream, a bad dream, where you're in a horrible situation of some kind.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
And the dream is so vivid and so real.
yeah.
And then you wake up and you suddenly realize, oh crap, that was just a dream, and how relieved you are. Like, oh wow, I'm not in prison.
Right,
I
right,
oh
right, right,
geez, no, I'm
right,
not in jail.
right,
Oh, I'm in my bed. I'm at home. That
right.
was a dream. And you feel this powerful sense of relief. But
Relief. Yeah,
but then you sit back and ask yourself, well, what was that?
right,
Why did
right,
I have that
right.
dream at all? Was it just randomness? And what this points to, I think, is something, and to go back to your original question too, Kale, about why modern people dismiss it.
Yeah, yeah,
Our default position really is rooted in scientism and naturalism. And therefore, our default position is always that if I can think of a naturalistic explanation for
right,
this
right,
phenomenon,
right.
therefore I don't have to pay attention to it.
That's right.
Even if there's no proof that the phenomenon is purely naturalistic,
Right, which
even
is
if there's no,
typical.
that's my default position.
Right. And this is what's so difficult, right, Larry? Because you have to listen to your conscience, right? And clearly the forces in your dream have access to your conscience not consciousness, your conscience in such a powerful and
Yeah.
immediate and almost pre-linguistic sort of way that you sort of you kind of, for me, I kind of stop and say, like, well, what is that? Like,
Yeah.
it's it's like my kind of it's precognitive in an interesting sort of way,
Yeah, and
or at least pre-rational.
it does influence our conscience, not our
Right,
consciousness, but our
right,
conscience.
right.
Think, for example, to go back to my comment too about the default position.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Think of near-death experiences and now the growing body of literature and scientific study of NDEs, of near-death experiences.
Yep,
You know,
yep.
as I would always say to my students who would ask me about this in theology class, the operative word in near-death experience is it's near death.
Near, yeah.
You didn't really die because if you're dead, you're dead, and you're not. You're not. It's not like Princess Bride. It's like mostly dead, not dead dead. All right. No, dead dead.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
don't.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
You don't come back. So the fact that you were clinically dead, no respiration, no heartbeat, no brain waves, doesn't necessarily mean you're dead, dead. Okay, all that caveat aside,
Yeah.
near death experiences, therefore, are a kind of an experience, in my mind, of the metaxis, of the in between. And,
Good. Yeah, yeah.
and however, scientists who have never studied the phenomenon are very, very quick to come forward and say, "Oh, that's just oxygen deprivation in the brain. That's just a mechanism in the brain that happens when the brain starts to die, and it's like the
Right.
brain's last gasp at something."
Yeah.
Even though there's no brain waves, even though there's no brain electrical activity, they're very confident in asserting this is simply the biological brain dying, and it's what it does when it dies. Except there's no evidence of that. But
Right.
that's our way of dismissing the fact that people then come back from these NDEs with their conscience changed. Their moral being is changed at its root, at its
Yeah.
ground, which means that this experience, even if it was a sort of divinely granted dream of some kind, and not a true experience of the afterlife, a
Right.
mystical experience granted to them by God in order to teach them something about life and death, all right, it alters them. It has changed them. And I think, short of a near death experience, which I think is a dream on steroids, our dreams can do the same thing for us. Absolutely.
Well, right. And I'm struck as I'm hearing you relate this. I'm struck in the scriptures, the story of the rich man who dies. And he goes, he dies, and he's missed the mark. He had his reward on earth, and he asks, I need to go back, and I need to tell my family, that they need to sort of walk the righteous path. You know what I'm talking about? I think it's the story
Yeah.
of Lazarus.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and and of course the answer is like, well, no, you can't. But do you remember what the angel says? I think it's an angel. I should look this up, but I believe it says something like, we have given them Moses and the
Yeah.
prophets.
That's right.
Right. And so if I think conceptually of like what are Moses and the prophets, right? These are accounts of of the metaxis, I think, as you might say. Like these are the
Yeah.
accounts of God and man interacting, and these are the accounts that we've been left. These sort of deep archetypal stories. And so those seem to be enough. And so I think it's natural, or perhaps maybe not natural, but maybe it's fitting that we take our dreams and we try to code match it onto what has been accounted for. These sort of
Yeah.
the way that dreams have functioned in the past, and these kinds of things. And I think you're right. I think that a sort of modern physicalist, materialist default mode that I am finding more and more, Larry, that really is what people think.
Yeah.
It,
It
you
is.
know, and I think it's pretty to think so, to quote Jake from The Sun Also Rises. In other words, it's a lot easier if you can dismiss NDEs. It's a lot easier if you can dismiss
Yeah.
the non-material as the non-existent. And you know, you and I are, I think, as far as our time and place are concerned, in the circles that we float around in, you and I are certainly super comfy with what we call the woo. what you can
Yeah,
call the strange or the weird or the uncanny. Um,
the
but I,
noumenal.
right, but I find that people, and I'm talking here about Catholics and Christians in 2024. Most of my fellow Christians are not terribly cozy with going there. That
Yeah, yeah,
imagine, in other words, it's safer to say, Kale, the dream you had this morning was nothing. The dream you had was,
yeah.
you're a little bit anxious about this and you're a little bit anxious about that. And your mind, when it is sort of unencumbered with the necessity of being logical and awake, has sort of mashed these two things together. Calm down, champ. Go about your business today. And so I can kind of sort of almost convince myself of that consciously, but unconsciously, I'm in a shit mood all day long. And that's
That's
and that's
right.
real. And you know,
And there's a
I don't know
reason
what
for
the
that.
sign is.
There's a reason for that because the dream was real and the dream meant something to you. The dream touched you on a
Yeah,
deep and
yeah,
profound level.
yeah,
And to simply dismiss it, therefore, as well, this is the dyspeptic movements of the connection between your gut and your brain or something or other
yeah,
is crazy.
yeah.
Well, I remember too, I recounted the dream that I had as a child. And I remember telling it to an atheist friend of mine one time, and he just laughed and said, well, there's an easy explanation for that dream. It's you grew up with all kinds of Catholic guilt, and
Yeah,
so that experience of being trapped between Jesus and Mary was your brain expressing the fact that you feel trapped in your super ego guilt
right,
Catholicism.
right, right, right,
As
right,
an
right,
8 or 9 year old boy, you were probably just starting to have dirty thoughts
right, right,
about
right,
girls and
right,
stuff, and so
right,
you
right, right,
felt bad about your naughty bits, and that was a
right,
super. So it was all very Freudian and so forth, and I
right.
walked away from that thinking, oh crap, that really just debunked everything. And but then the more I thought about it, the more I thought, you know what? I was actually raised a very lukewarm Catholic. We
Right,
were
right,
not we were
right.
not good, and I was not. I had no super ego guilt imposed. If
Yeah,
anything, I grew up in that 60s and 70s. I'm
yeah,
okay, you're okay. Pewter chalice, felt banner Catholicism of
right.
there is no such thing as sin. So then I started
Yeah,
thinking, you know what? What
yeah,
that atheist was telling me was just abject bullshit,
right.
just off the top of his head. And so I rejected it.
Yeah, and that's the sort of the Freudian repressionist sort of model, and that I
Yeah.
I just don't buy, really. I just don't, and I same similarly, I did not grow up in a sort of a a nasty, hyper scrupulous,
Yeah.
world. It just did not, that was not the world I grew up in. And so, but I'm a person of conscience for whatever reason, and I think part of that is my formation, but part of it is like, I do think that some of us are born more conscientious. Like I do believe that. And so um now I think temperament meets formation in some kind of interesting way. But my dreams have always I've always been just, I think, comfortable looking at dreams as a form of instruction and a form of, information, right? I'm receiving information, and it and it's not just from me. I think
Hmm.
that's my point, is that I can't quite, as much as I would like to convince myself of this, let's be clear, as much as I would like to convince myself that dreams are not uh anything more than just me. I believe that they are a mechanism by which we receive external information.
I agree. I think
You know,
so. And it's information that we need to pay attention to.
yeah,
And sadly, we don't. Let's go back to the near-death experiences and
yeah,
the reductive materialistic explanation of it as just sort of anoxic oxygen deprivation to the brain, that it's just some mechanism of the brain. Well, here's the interesting fact, though. Not everybody has an NDE when they go into clinical death.
right, right.
In fact, the research I've read indicates that it's like a 50-50 split almost. That half the
Interesting.
people that are clinically dead have no such no such experience. I remember the late Father Benedict Rochelle. Remember, he had
Oh
been in
yeah,
a
yeah, of
car
course.
accident as a pedestrian, and and his heart stopped, and they had to revive him and all that stuff. And I saw him on EWTN, and he talked about the fact that he was really angry when he came around that he did not get an NDE. He did not
Yeah,
experience anything other than blackness, all right,
right,
and nothingness. And his first conscious memory of being after being hit by the car was of waking up in the hospital. And so
right.
the point I'm making is that if it's a pure brain mechanism of some kind that generates NDEs, then it would probably be almost a
That's
100%
right. Yeah,
thing that would happen to every brain as it starts to die. It would be something that you could easily document. So it actually adds weight to the idea. Also, it sort of counteracts the idea, sort of new agey and Gnostic,
right.
that a near-death experience is simply something that automatically gets triggered as your soul leaves your body. That it's almost like a spiritual mechanism
Yeah,
of some kind. It's automatic. Your
right,
soul leaves your
right.
body, and you automatically start to see God. And so, no, I think the fact that not everybody has an NDE shows us that it is actually, this goes to what you said about information. This is, I think, a divinely gifted grace, a divinely gifted dream or mystical experience wherein God is coming to this person in this moment of crisis in their life with a message of some kind. And that message is one that they then bring back when they come back from clinical death. And so I think that dreams in general, not just the ND, I think you're absolutely right. I think we need to pay greater attention to the information that God is trying to teach us in our dreams.
And I think maybe uh, a tell here is, we know that when you speak with artists and they're talking about their inspiration, and they call it inspiration, which is also very interesting. We know the root of that word with spirit and breath, which of course is, God breathes into the clay to form man, and so there's a sort of a rich tradition of that. But artists talk about receiving a vision, and that they're trying to realize a vision, to make real
Yeah,
that which they have sort of experienced in some interesting sorts of ways. And so I think that the artists also are great artists, and even our mediocre artists, right? But our artists seem to be able to tap into some extra personal reservoir, and mash things together, much like the way that the unconscious mashes things together in a dream. And I don't think it's insignificant that, for many years, we have called Hollywood the dream factory. That it's how powerful. And I think this is one of the reasons why we laud our artists, is because they seem to be able to capture that which most of us only experience in this
yeah.
strange between world. So
No, and it is. I mean, that's the beauty of Hollywood as well as its
yeah,
downside.
yeah,
Is
yeah. Of
that
course, it's right. Right, it's right. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
it is a dream factory, and I mean, some films are just some movies are just profound as hell,
Yeah,
and just really they're artistic, they're real works of art,
yeah.
and real works of cinematography, and real works of script writing, and you sometimes you sit back and you realize, you know what? Wow, whoever that is in Hollywood that wrote that screenplay knew what the hell they were talking
Right.
about.
And Larry, and think about it. When you are when you really experience a movie that really resonates with you, we have this experience that it transports you. We have this
Yes,
experience in which, everything else gets sort of kind of quieted down, and we are moved. We use
yeah,
we use the language, that it moves us, that it is mesmerizing, that it captivates us, that it is
yes,
spellbinding. And it's this language that something else is going on, and we can't help it. It's like, and that's
yeah,
such a tremendous power and responsibility, of course, but such a tremendous power, that artists seem to have. And and this is not just for movies. This is true of the visual arts. This is true of poetry and story
Yeah. Oh,
and all of these
absolutely.
kinds of things. That it's and ultimately, the sort of the nexus of this is, you know, the liturgy, and the way in which the liturgy becomes in a real sense a shared dream, and each mass sort of
Yeah.
brings you through salvation history and brings us forward and backward toward, the elevation of the host, and this
Yeah.
is it is meant to be kind of time out of time, and I think this is why, for me personally, not sure what you think about this, but why I believe the power of the liturgy is not its relevance in any kind of
Bingo. Let's,
socio-political
yeah.
communal way, but rather it's about the ultimate relevance, right? It's about the ultimate transportation of us, the congregation, as a body, which anticipates, the hieros gamos, right? And
Yes.
the sacred marriage between God and His people. And so to sort of dink around with liturgy in such a way as to make it irrelevant, to make it a kind of a youth mass, or whatever these kind of things that we all went through
Yeah.
together, is such a missed opportunity and a misguided desire to be relevant in all the wrong ways.
Oh God, we could talk forever on this. Let's dig into this because I think
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
it's an important issue. Let's go back to what we were talking about before. The really great point that you brought up, that the realm of dreams, which is really the realm of the symbolic, the powerfully
Right,
symbolic,
right,
has a
right,
direct effect on our, not our consciousness, but our conscience, on our
right,
moral
right,
conscience. And
right.
what that brings out is something too my friend David Dean in his book, the theologian David Dean, his book, The Tyranny of the Banal, brings out, which is
Uh,
that the church's moral theology, her morality, makes no sense unless it's embedded in the transcendent, unless it's
right.
first embedded in the Trinitarian God, and that we put the cart before the horse when we end up being a moralizing, finger wagging church. Now, and that we don't, in a sense, place transcendence first, the supernatural first, the noumenal first. All of these things that we're talking about are the penumbra
Yeah,
in which the moral commandments now take on life. Now, my problem with the so-called new liturgy, the Novus Ordo, it can be
yeah,
done beautifully, and
yeah,
I've seen it done beautifully.
yeah, yeah.
But I
Same,
think
same.
what a lot of traditionalists sort of instinctively feel and understand is that the average way in which it is celebrated in most parishes is utterly prosaic and utterly moralizing. It's horizontalizing. It goes
Mm.
out of its way, in a sense, to downplay all of the transcendent supernatural elements in order to emphasize the fellowship meal aspect of this. It ends up being a kind of strange exercise in the Kantian reduction of religion
Yeah,
to ethics.
I
All
think
right.
that's right. No, I think that's right. Yeah, I have absolutely keep going.
No, no, and I just finish my thought, and then you can come
Yeah,
in.
yeah,
And I think this is why a lot of people, even young people, walk away from it with this feeling of, well, there was a sort of ersatz fake quality about it, a kind of fake conviviality and fake fellowship. I get better
yeah.
fellowship on the golf course or the bowling alley with my friends or in the bar with my friends. This kind of forced conviviality, felt banner conviviality, is utterly superficial, does not speak to my soul. And so this sort of Kantian reduction to the purely ethical ends up destroying the ethical.
How exactly? In what way do we see it destroying the ethical, Larry?
Because ultimately the ethical cannot be sustained unless it's
Uh,
embedded in a broader symbolic narrative, a broader provocation, a broader sense of why I must. As Balthasar, Hans Urs Balthasar says in Volume 1 of the Theological Aesthetic, I believe it's page 13 in the English translation, right? Where I've underlined it and underlined. It
yeah,
says, in a world where beauty has been removed, the reasons why we should do the good lose their
that's
cogency,
brilliant. That's brilliant.
lose
Yeah,
their cogency. The reason why the good is good loses its bite, loses its provocation, loses its hold on me, absent desire, absent beauty, absent some aspect
Right,
that grabs us
right.
and transports us.
That's right.
For better or for worse, the new liturgy, as it's often celebrated, does not transport us.
Yeah, I remember as a young man in 1993, I went to Rome as part of a study abroad program, and we were there for several months, and it was genuinely a transformative experience. A lot of fun, I was a
Yeah,
kid, it wasn't like it was a strict pilgrimage, but it was great. And I remember, you're inundated, of course, with beauty. But when you see enough churches in Rome, you start to see the commonalities of the iconography and the system of symbols that are kind of incarnate in the very structures and decorations of the church. In fact, you recognize that they're not decorations at all. In fact, they are information bearing, informing, bearing mechanisms and structures that are all conspiring in such a way to transport me out of my jeans and t-shirt into something broader and grander. And that in walking into a church is one thing, but to walk into a church like that has been so consciously constructed in such a way to confabulate and to break me down as a kind of modest pedestrian and to elevate me as one of the pilgrims that are going to gather around singing Sanctus, Sanctus, Sanctus. You're like, oh, oh, and for me, as a kid who grew up in suburban America in the 70s and 80s, it was the distinct sense that actually what I had experienced was at best, pale imitation of something much more ancient, something much more grand, and frankly, something much more important, because my
yeah,
experience growing up was that actually none of it was important. As much as my mom and dad did their best to sort of counter program everything that I read through my body and through my senses and through my experiences with it, this is actually not very important. And
yeah,
everything else is important because everything else is better. Frankly, it's better constructed, it's better produced, it's better. It's all those sorts of things. Whereas when
yeah,
I would shuffle on up to mass on a Sunday in high school, it was just kind of like, meh, what are we even doing here, people? Right? What are we even doing here? Is this some sort
yeah.
of cruel, lame, banal hoax that you have perpetuated upon me? Well, you go to a place like Rome, and you're like, well, okay, I have to take this conspiracy a little bit more seriously because right, somebody
Yeah,
else clearly did,
yeah.
and I know nothing, right? And that was sort of that's that turn, that you have to make. How much more difficult is that turn to make when you live in this beige world, as we have talked about,
Oh,
before?
absolutely. I did not have an experience in Rome when I was a young man, like you're describing.
Yeah,
Although I had,
yeah. I was
I
I was
had,
I was 19. To be fair, I was
yeah,
19.
I had similar experiences though, late high school, early college,
Yeah, yeah,
that convinced me that my belief up to that point that the church, like you said, is just has perpetrated a hoax for
yeah,
2,000 years that went
yeah,
away. But I will say this to corroborate what you said, and to once again make that link between beauty and the good. And you have to have that link in order to be transported into a realm that makes the ethical ethical. But
yeah.
the point is I went to Rome for the first time in 2008.
Okay.
And okay, yes, the churches are beautiful and so on and so forth.
Yeah,
But the thing that really hit home to me was when I went on the Scavi tour, it's called, and,
yeah.
and actually went to the where St. Peter's bones are buried. Then I
Amazing.
went to the church St. Paul outside the walls
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah, yeah.
prayed before the tomb of St. Paul. And then I just stumbled into the Church of St. Augustine near Piazza Navona and wandered
Uh,
towards the back end and suddenly just stumbled upon the tomb of St. Monica, his mother. You know,
yep, yep,
I thought to myself, what kind of place is Rome where you
yeah,
just randomly stumble across the tomb of someone from 1700, the mother of
yeah.
the great St. Augustine?
Right,
There she is, residing in
right,
that tomb right there.
right,
And what
right.
hit me and struck me was, at the very least, this thing called Catholicism is definitely making a historical claim.
Yeah.
It is making a claim upon reality. This is not some new age fantasy. It is saying these are historical people who attested to historical events
And
and
that
that these things happened, and it is the supernatural impinging upon the natural.
Yeah, yeah, and that is, I think, you really nail why I get so frustrated with the contemporary church, which is why I get so frustrated with our leadership, which
Yeah.
is why when I see, someone like what is that Winters guy, the
Michael
Catholic
Sean
Church,
Winters,
Michael Sean
one of the most
Winters,
vicious human beings writing today in the
yeah,
Catholic press.
when uh our Holy Father appoints Robert McElroy, Cardinal McElroy, as the new
Yeah.
cardinal designate of Washington D.C., and his reaction is like, this is so prophetic. Pope Francis really gets it, and I just I you know
Yeah.
like what the heck, like
Well, the interesting thing too, National Catholic Reporter came out with a headline that said that Cardinal McElroy's appointment to Washington is exactly the bishop America needs in order to heal the divisions within the church.
and
And
I'm
I
like,
thought,
what?
I'm currently writing an
What?
article for Catholic Report on this, and I'm going to send it in to Carl Olson this morning,
Oh, excellent.
which is you do a double take when you read that and say,
Yeah,
let's see, Robert McElroy is probably the most polarizing and divisive
right,
character in the
right.
American hierarchy right now. There's no doubt about it. I mean, his
I mean,
article in
I think
Amer
the only one that even vies for that post is Supich,
yeah,
in my
Supich,
estimation.
well, who is the great
And
promoter
again,
of
we can
McElroy.
say this, non-ideologically, right? I think this is
Oh
really an
yeah,
important. Look, people know that Zelden and Chapp are not going to be fans of a Supich or a McElroy, right? So
that's right.
fine, philosophically, theologically, the whole thing. But just from the sort of the divisiveness of the way they go about their business, they are not liked people.
Let's just say this. Yes, I have a lot of contacts out there.
Yeah, yes, yeah,
I know a lot of people. I'm just going to say that, and I'm not going to name drop, and I'm not going
yeah,
to say anything beyond that. But the overall opinion of Cardinal Supich is that he's a bit of a bully.
yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
and he is not well liked. He's not well liked by the priests of Chicago. He's not well liked by his fellow American bishops because he is perceived to be, first, an intellectual lightweight who has no right to be a bully, but who is nevertheless a bully. Okay, so I'm just going to throw that out there.
Yeah.
But also, then McElroy, he's championed and lionized by the American Catholic left as this Cardinal Newman-esque sort
This
of
big brained,
big brain. He's
yeah,
degrees from Stanford and Harvard and blah blah blah. Look how elitist they become, how credentialist
amazing.
they
Yeah,
become,
amazing.
as if most of us don't know people that have graduated from Harvard and Stanford that aren't flaming idiots. Okay, if
Right,
there's
right,
one
right,
thing
right.
that comes with getting a PhD and being involved in the academic world, or in your case, work teaching at a high-powered prep
Yeah,
school, what you're involved in the academic world, is that you become to realize that 90% of people walking around with fancy degrees after their names are flaming idiots.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I'm not probably a hyperbolic exaggeration when I say 90%, but you
Right.
get the point, which is, all of a sudden now the people at the National Catholic Reporter are pushing McElroy as this great intellect simply because of where he got his degrees. And yet everything that McElroy writes in public, like his famous essay now from last year in America Magazine,
That's
where
right.
he says we need to change church teaching on homosexuality. The church's teaching on homosexuality is just wrong. The entirety of our sexual morality needs to be reworked top to bottom. He argues essentially for most sexual sins being venal sins, not mortal sins. We need to allow the
But I
divorce
would
and
even question that, like on what grounds are they
on
even
what,
considered venal? Right? I
yeah,
mean, it's so
which is
it's
then his
disingenuous, I think.
yeah, exactly. Now he then uses the venality of sexual sins as a reason for why gay Catholics need to be able to go to communion. Divorced and remarried Catholics, cohabitating Catholics, they all need
Right.
to be able to go to communion because we all know that those sins are really not very important. And he even says we should not make any longer any distinctions in the LGBTQ community. By the way, just using LGBTQ is a intellectually superficial and lazy way of addressing the topic. By the way, how is the church supposed to be more inclusive towards bisexuals? Can
Right.
you please answer me that
Right.
question? Does that mean we now need to allow up to communion a man, his wife, and his gay lover, all three of them? Sure. What the hell does it even mean
Well,
to
it's it's
say
it's
we
it's
have to be open to
nonsensical.
bisexuals in the
Yeah,
church?
it's nonsensical to the core because it's fundamentally a flawed anthropology. Like, this is
Deeply flawed. So it calls into question. I'm on a rant now, and
no,
I'll
love
turn
it,
it
love
back over to you.
it.
This is why his appointment as the Cardinal Archbishop of Washington D.C. is such a bad idea and such a bad appointment. He's polarizing. He's divisive. He's a dissenter from established church teaching. He's also called for the ordination of women. This is not a healer. This is not a conciliator. This is a liberal culture warrior. This
Yeah,
is
yeah.
a divisive, polarizing man who should not have been made Archbishop of Washington, D.C.
So my question to you then, accepting all this, of course, I want to talk to, you know, a McElroy or a Supich. I want to talk to a Michael Sean Winters. I want to talk to one of these guys and say, do you really think that if you could wave your magic wand and all of the entirety of the bishops of the United States, they're all kind of carbon copies of McElroy or Supich or Tobin or whatnot. Do you really think that this will usher in a golden age of Catholicism, both here in the United States of America, but also worldwide? I mean, do you really think that?
Yeah.
And I do they even bother to think through the implications of what they're suggesting? I mean, what is going to happen? Like, what is this magic? If you could imagine that, like, how do you see that, Larry?
Yeah. So let's say that the Michael Sean Winters and the McElroys of the church get their way, and all of a sudden we have gay weddings taking place in the Catholic Church, and we
Yeah,
have
yeah, yeah, yeah. This is what I'm.
the normalization of LGBTQ everything, that it's all moral and good, that we see divorce and remarriage allowed
Right.
willy-nilly, a cohabitation. Yeah, that's no big deal. We
Open
ordain.
communion.
We
Open
open
communion, right?
communion with Protestants, women priests, contraception,
Yeah.
the whole nine yards.
That's what I mean. Like run through the laundry list. Let's
All
just say that
married
you get it.
priests,
Let's say
married
you get it. You
priests.
get
All
what you
right,
finally
so
want.
the Catholic Church simply becomes the Episcopal Church, but with a pope, and that's what we become. Well, the fact is, I just mentioned the Episcopal Church, which means, there is a canary in this coal mine, or to use a different metaphor, there is a control in the experiment.
That's right. That's right.
There are other Christian ecclesial bodies that have gone down this path, and it has been an abject pastoral failure. It has not increased the people in the pews. If anything, it's accelerated their exit from the pews. So when the church comes forward and says, hey, look, we're just like the secular world. We're just like everybody else now. There's absolutely nothing distinctive about us. So please come on in. People say, I got something better to do on Sunday morning than waste my time with that nonsense, that kind of cultural appeasement. The German synodal way. Oh, look, the German Catholics want to be like the German Lutherans, except the German Lutherans have already gone down this path, and they're in worse shape than the Catholic Church in Germany.
Which is just saying a lot, my God.
Which is saying where there's like 8% mass participation from Catholics in Germany, there's like 3% Sunday worship participation amongst Lutherans. Okay, so there's a control in this experiment. So my point is that, and I think they know this.
Do
So
you do
ultimately,
you do you think they know this?
yeah, I think the more
Okay,
intelligent
okay.
ones do. I think the more intelligent ones do, which ultimately means that their support for these issues is ideological and not pastoral, not
Okay.
pastoral.
Okay.
Because I think
Okay.
they have enough pastoral sense to realize, no, this is probably not going to be a magic bullet that's going to suddenly fill our pews.
What do they think is going to happen then?
I think what they are hoping for is simply a transformation of the church so that those who are in the pews are no longer the traditional, more conservative Catholics. Those who are in the pews are the rainbow people. They want rainbow pews. That this is who they feel comfortable with. This is the church that they want. Look at the recently released autobiography of Pope Francis. All right. Now, he doesn't talk about this very much, and I don't want to tag him with necessarily that Francis wants the pews filled with rainbow people because he has spoken out against that. Nevertheless, in this to go back to our discussion of
Yeah.
liturgy, in the autobiography, Pope Francis is quoted as saying that if you like the old Latin Mass, that means you're mentally unbalanced and emotionally immature. He just makes this blanket statement, which leads to the conclusion, what kind of people does Pope Francis therefore want in the pews? He obviously doesn't want a traditional minded person in the pews. He doesn't mind offending them. He doesn't mind calling them names. He doesn't mind deposing bishops like Dominic Ray just in France the other day, okay, who's
Yeah.
traditionalist. He doesn't
Yeah.
mind getting rid of them at all. He doesn't mind driving those people completely out of the church. He does, though, however, want to make sure that we keep in the pews those of the peripheries. And by peripheries, I think he means those of a secularist, leftist, sexually libertine point of view.
So I struggle with this because, I try really hard not to, impart whatever, think ill of people. But let's say that you, again, wave the magic wand and you get rid of all the baddies, get rid of all the backwardists, get rid of all the
Yeah.
inditretismo or whatever,
Indiatrist.
indietrists,
Indiatrist. Yeah.
and get rid of all of the, what is it, emotionally stunted? Is that what he was saying?
Emotionally
Um,
stunted, mentally imbalanced,
mentally imbalanced.
not just,
Okay.
we can all point to certain trads that are, in fact,
Oh, yeah, for
kind of,
sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
emotionally immature people or simply role
Yeah.
playing some kind of weirdo
Yeah.
Catholic
I get it. I
Amish
get it. I get it. I
bullshit.
get it.
We get it. But,
Yeah, yeah.
lefties do that too.
Right.
Lefties do
Okay.
that
So
too.
let's say we get our magic wand and we get rid of all those guys. Get rid of all
Yeah.
those guys. Um, Now what?
Yeah.
What's the generational plan?
Well, I
In other
don't,
words,
yeah.
fast forward, let's say we do it today. Done. Okay, we got rid of all the baddies. And we now have the Church of the Synodal Way, blah, 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 blah. We get it. You win. You win, sir. What does it look like 25 years from now? Is this like, do they honestly think that they're going to usher in some kind of renaissance? I mean, look, Larry,
Yeah.
do they, let me ask you that question first. Do you think they think that this will usher in some kind of radical renaissance of American Catholicism?
I think a significant number of them actually do really buy into the
I can't.
argument,
How?
that if we just make the church more palatable to the sexual revolution,
Yeah,
that
which is what it is.
we will bring back into the church all those people who left the church because of the sexual revolution. Now, like I said, I think the more intelligent ones
Really?
among
God,
the
that
left
hurts.
don't buy that narrative because they're
Yeah.
smart enough to look around and see. I think the more intelligent ones accept the judgment of Pope Benedict when he was Joseph Ratzinger and writing in 1969 that the church is going to become less and less relevant. It's going to shrink. It's going to become a small group of true believers. I think the more intelligent liberal Catholics understand that the church is going to go through a period of cultural shrinkage. Okay. But I think they don't understand that, Benedict had a different prescription to remedy that, which is you got to
Right.
stick to your guns. You have to
Right. Right.
double
Right.
down on orthodoxy. You have to double down on the call to holiness and what it is that makes us specifically Christian. Whereas the liberal mind is, yes, we're going to shrink, but in the long run, we will come back stronger than ever. And I think they really believe that. I think that eventually there will be this springtime in the church. What they say here's, and I'll say
But
this,
do
and
they, okay, but really, Larry, do they really think that? Come on, man. They
I
can't be that
you're
dumb.
asking me to crawl
I
into the mind
know,
of a
I
McElroy
know,
or a
I know,
Supich
I know.
or a Michael Sean Winters, and all I
So,
know
so
is that when they write, they do write like, hey, we need this in order to stay relevant.
relevant to what? For what? It's a simple question, Larry. To what? For what? Okay, Larry,
Yeah,
I'll tell you
that's
a quick story. I'll tell you a quick story. I'm 17. I am a junior in high school at a Catholic high school, and I am getting a fire hose of social justice, liberation, theology.
yeah.
Okay. And at the time, like, I'm like, fine, whatever, cool, awesome. Like, this is great. I was not, some sort of, crypto Rush Limbaugh listening, Reagan loving. This is just not me. It's not who I was. I was, if anything, I was a kind of lefty progressive, the Church of Rolling Stone and all of that. I mean, truly, right? So anyway, so I'm kind of putting two and two together, and I'm liking the sort of the preferential option of the poor, and I'm liking kind of liberationist sexual ethic. I'm all in. I'm all in. Okay, this is a true story. And I very quickly say, okay, like, I want to say her name. Okay, Miss Jones, I'm buying what you're selling. Like, this is great. Like, let's go. Let's liberate the world from oppression. But why the bloody heck do you think I need to show up on Sunday morning? Are you out of your frickin' mind?
Yeah.
So what did I do? I stopped showing up on Sunday morning. Of course I left. This is absolutely absurd. Okay, I'm a 17-year-old, reasonably intelligent guy. I'm not like killing it on the SATs. Like, I'm not Mr. Big Brain. Okay. I'm just like I'm like as normal as they come. And I
Yeah.
very quickly make the very quick sort of, back of the envelope math that, you know, if what you're saying is true, then why the heck am I waking myself up on Sunday morning?
Yes.
All of what that means symbolically, right? So
What's it? Yeah, go ahead.
no, it's just like so therefore, I know that these guys who are cardinals, they're writers, they're professors, they must be able to do the same back of the envelope calculus that I was able to do as a 17-year-old boy. So
You would think. Go ahead, finish your thought.
oh, I'm dumbfounded. I have been as dumbfounded. I'm as dumbfounded at 52 as I was at 17.
Yeah, I guess I am too, Kale. But let me just throw this out there. I
Yeah,
think part of the problem is that lefties, Catholic lefties in particular,
yeah.
tend to think of the church in completely political categories.
Okay.
Okay, you see this certainly with the people at National Catholic Reporter who can't talk about the church in any other language than that of left and right, conservative and liberal. Now, here I am talking in the language of
Yeah,
conservative and liberal, but it's a convenient shorthand. But they actually mean it theologically and right down to the metaphysical core of everything
yeah.
about the church, in their view, is analyzed through a political lens, which means this: it's issue driven. It's issue driven. In other words, what is your opinion on contraception? What is your opinion on
Right,
women, please? What
right.
is your opinion on homosexuality? And they'll do a poll and realize, okay, 80% of American Catholics think gay sex is okay, contraception is okay, and blah, blah, blah. Therefore, if we just change the church's teaching on those issues, the people that disagree with the church on those issues will come back to church. But what
That's
that
so
ignores
funny.
is the fact that people don't leave the church because they disagree with this or that issue.
Right.
They don't. Most people who are attracted to Catholicism and wish to stay in the church, even if they disagree with the church's teaching on XYZ, will simply negotiate internally and spiritually. I'm a Catholic. I love my faith. I'm
Yeah.
attracted to it for the following reasons, but I do disagree with my church on the following issues. If you are committed to the Catholic faith in a deep and profound way, a simple disagreement on an issue is not going to drive you out of the church.
Right,
And
right,
therefore, what the Catholic left misunderstands is that the mass exodus of Catholics out of the church has far, far more to do with the loss of a fundamental faith in the supernatural and
right,
transcendence
right,
and in the
right,
church as
right,
a
right.
vehicle of that transcendence than it does with any particular damn issue. All
Yeah.
right. It's the
Yeah.
loss of a sense of connection with God via the church. That's what we have lost, and that's why people walk away.
Right. Right. So two things pop into my head. Eric Voegelin and C.S. Lewis. And Eric Voegelin, in his book, The New Science of Politics, talks about neo-Gnostic movements of the 20th century, and I think he would safely say into the 21st century, are predicated on what he sort of somewhat awkwardly calls, but it's sort of become commonplace now, but the immanentization of the Christian eschaton, which
Yeah.
is simply to say to make real that which Christianity posits outside of time, right? that heaven is not somewhere where you go, but heaven is the thing that we can create right here. And so it dovetails very
Yeah.
nicely into a kind of Marxist, eschatology, right? And it's
Yeah.
immanentized, right? That is to make it happen now.
That's key.
So,
It's and it's completely immanentized. It's not
right,
simply a sense of I can have a foretaste of heaven now,
right,
which is
right,
a
right, right, right.
perfectly. It's
That's right.
that
That's right.
heaven is now.
That's right. There's no supernatural. It's all
Yeah,
natural. We're just going to make the natural special. It's like it's a kind of
that's
funny,
right.
kind of
Yeah.
funny thing. So, and then secondly, in and I know people are probably tired of people like me saying you have to read uh, the Ransom trilogy of C.S. Lewis, and especially the third book, That Hideous Strength. And
Oh
I
yeah.
will never get tired of telling people to read this book, if for no other reason than just to keep annoying people. But I'm kidding. It is a fantastic book. And one of the characters in the evil organization called the National Institute for Coordinated Experiments, or NICE, or NICE. One of the members, one of the upper echelon members of the NICE, is a Reverend Strake, Straik, and he is, I think, one of Lewis's, just his ability to kind of put his finger on what is going to come is just nonpareil. And the Reverend Strake is, of course, an atheist, agnostic, prelate, priest. I would assume Anglican, because we're dealing with England in
Yeah.
1945, let's say. And his his entire theology is an immanentizing of the Christian eschaton, and that not only will this happen politically, but this will be brought about scientifically and through experimentation. And it is, and it is distinctively anti-human, in its ethos. And so it's another great one of these great prophetic characters. And he talks about, oh, we used to think that, Christian, heaven was somewhere else. And Lewis says it much better than me. He has really mastered the terminology, the slithery terminology of the
Yeah.
theologian who would talk you out of believing in God. And I think I listened to the McElroys. I've in other times called him Cardinal Screwtape. I probably, if I were being super cryptic, I would just call him Cardinal Strake. But he and others like him and his boosters in Catholic media and in Catholic academia, I truly believe, have lost their faith in the supernatural claims of Christianity. And certainly the church's claims to being in any way special. And so, therefore, I feel like they treat the church as some kind of legacy institution through which they can bring about the revolution. And I actually mean that.
Yeah. I think that's wow, that's a very interesting way to put it there at the very end. They treat the church like a legacy institution. And what's really telling about that, Cal, by the way, I agree with everything you just said. That Hideous Strength by Lewis is just, it's, read it in conjunction with Lewis's nonfiction, The
Yes,
Abolition
yeah,
of Man.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
and you
yeah,
get Lewis's take on the dystopian nature of our future that's
yeah,
around the culture, around the corner in a technocratic paradigm. And that and what Lewis understood and what you just reiterated is something I've said over and over again in many of my blog posts, is that the modern Catholic Church is characterized by a de facto atheism
that's right.
at
That's
its
exactly
core,
right. Yeah,
the non-belief of the believers. And what's interesting, to go back to our question about do we think Catholic liberals, lefties, do you think they know that their prescription for change is not going to lead to a new springtime in the church? I don't know what they know, but I know
yeah.
that they may not completely understand their own atheism. In other words,
That's
uh,
interesting. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's
in other
interesting.
words, when I say there's a de facto atheism, I mean it's a kind of practical atheism. It's an atheism of ideology and action
Mhm.
that is latent
Yeah.
in their belief system and in their structure of their thought, that they may or may not even be consciously aware of it. So, for example, when you have a Cardinal McElroy come forward and say, we need to completely restructure Catholic sexual morality, from
Right.
top to bottom, and to rethink, to get rid of natural law thinking, and to replace it with a more phenomenological, I don't know, what existentialist,
Yeah.
personalist,
Yeah. Yeah.
modern
Yeah.
therapeutic, psychological categories of human sexuality or whatever. What I don't think he understands is that that's an atheistic point of view.
Yeah.
What I don't think he understands is that what that involves is the complete destruction of the Christian claim about reality, a complete reworking of our notion of creation. It's an uncreation.
Right.
And you know, and
Yeah.
this is what I don't think they understand.
Well, this might sound like a strange question, but it's not really a question. But I'll cart it out here. This is what I want to ask to these people. Do you have no children? What I mean by that, there's a moment at the end of Shakespeare's Macbeth in which a character has just found out that Macbeth and his assassins have descended upon his family home and murdered
Yeah,
not only his wife and his children, but the entire household. And
yeah,
of course, he's trying to gather himself. He's obviously upset. And he looks to the prince and he says something, you know, um, does he have no children? And of course the answer is no, he does not have children. And where I'm getting at with this is that I look at these cardinals and I look at these theologians and I look at these um mouthpieces in the Catholic press, and I genuinely wonder, do they have no sense of their own children? you know
yeah.
my obsession has been and remains, how can I witness to something bigger than myself so as to transmit this and shoot into the future for my own children and my students and this generation, that which will be necessary for a life of abundance and for a connection to the real. And I look at this flattened immanentization of the Christian eschaton, this false
Yeah.
anti-gospel that is promoted by these figures, and I wonder to myself, do they not care about the children? And I know that is a sort of a cliche, what about the children? But like, I actually mean it. I actually mean it.
Yeah.
That these are the kinds of things that you can say and talk about when you don't care about your grandchildren.
Wow. I think this is true. And I think a lot of it is that they've convinced themselves somehow, some way, that this is good for their children.
Right, right. No, that's what I'm saying. It's a perfect
It's
little
a, I
awful
think this,
inversion.
whenever I see like a photograph online, social media of
Yeah,
some mother or father or mother and father together, and they've taken their three children to the Pride Parade in San
yeah,
Francisco,
yeah,
and I saw an interview just the other day with a woman who brought her child to a Pride Parade,
yeah.
at which there was full frontal nudity,
Sure.
sex acts in the street were going on, men were dressed up in bondage outfits and so on, and the
Yeah,
interviewer asked the woman, "Are you not afraid of your children being exposed to this show?" Quite to the contrary. I want
right.
my children growing up with a positive image of their own bodies, of sexuality, of the beauty of sex. And this
I
is a
mean,
way,
Larry,
so good
Larry,
grief.
that's a death work,
Yeah,
right? It's a
you're
death
think
work.
I'm thinking to myself, what a bill of bullshit this woman has bought into. What an ideology she has bought into. If she actually thinks that exposing her children to men engaging in sex acts on the street while dressed in bondage outfits
Right.
is actually a way of inspiring their own positive body image and a healthy view of sexuality, then you begin to understand the deep de facto atheism
That's
that
right.
is
That's right.
animating a person like that.
Yeah,
This cannot in any way, shape, or form be an expression of the divine, of God, of something
that's right.
transcendent.
That's right.
It is
And
its negation.
right. And exactly, it's negation. And this is not the gospel that built the world. You know what I mean? Like, it's
No.
this is not, I was in England this past summer and at Westminster Abbey, and I was there for 7 o'clock. Was it Vespers? No, 7 o'clock. Anyway, Evensong. And honestly, there are very few things that are more beautiful than to experience Evensong at Westminster Cathedral. Just
Yeah.
stunning, gorgeous. Everything conspires in such a way to just completely
Yeah.
transport you. And I'm looking at all of this, and I'm looking around, and I'm, of course, I'm Catholic, so I'm kind of like, well, I was like, it's a shame the Anglicans are so crazy now, and all that sort of stuff. I'm keeping it to myself. You'd have been proud of me, Larry.
Salvation by
Um,
taste alone.
right, right, right. But I'm thinking to myself, the church that is trying to be fashioned by our progressive leadership could not build Westminster
No,
Abbey. It could not write and direct and perform and pray Evensong.
that's right.
And to me, the work then seems to either I align myself with the forces that can create such a thing, or we die, right? Because to align myself with the death works that
Yeah.
you have just sketched out for us is to prepare for perdition. It just seems as simple as that,
Well,
I
just look
think.
at, I mean, a perfect example of what you're talking about, Kale, is the rebuilding and then the rededication of Notre Dame Cathedral
Yeah,
in
yeah,
Paris.
yeah, yeah,
Now, kudos, they did a good job in
yeah,
rebuilding that structure, and they did, for the most part, preserve what had been created in the past.
yeah,
But then the new main altar
yeah.
was
Oh
that
God,
bronze,
that
weird,
half egg
a
thing.
half
Like,
egg kind of
oh,
thing.
oh,
And it
oh.
speaks to what you're talking about, which is it's number one, it's so out of place in the magnificence of that cathedral.
Yeah,
But then the question would arise, would they even be able to commission an artist to create an
to do
altar
it.
that was
Yeah,
in keeping with the
yeah,
aesthetics of
right,
that place? Do they have the capacity to do that? It's clear they don't want to do it,
right.
and they didn't do it. But would they even have the capacity to do it?
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about this and this idea of the capacity and the competency to do such things. And, we've lost so much that
Yeah,
one wonders if we can find our way back to it. Because, look, uh, what I have found in life is that tradition, you and I are sort of small t traditionalists, right?
yeah,
We are traditionalists in that sense. Tradition is not a collection of books.
yeah,
Tradition is not an algorithm. Tradition is not a flash drive filled with every book that's ever been written in every language, which we can do, right?
yeah,
That's not what tradition is. Tradition is the living, embodied, liturgical engagement with what has gone before and shooting all of that into the future in us. Like tradition is an embodied
yeah.
living thing. And as soon as it becomes consigned to a flash drive or to some books on a shelf, it misses some fundamental point. And so when you think about, the things that we have forgotten how to do,
Yeah.
even technically, engineering wise, right? Those things are can become lost very quickly, like within a generation. And so that kind of that this idea animates me, and I think this is yeah, this is also true, and maybe especially true of the church,
Yeah,
right?
I think too, though, don't you? Gosh, it's all true that we've lost an ability to do things, and that we've forgotten so much of what we used to be able to do, and could we even do it again? But in many ways, also this loss of ability was the result of a cultivated effort
Right, right.
at losing
That's
the.
right.
For example, I look to Europe. For example, Europe is a great example of contrast in this regard, because on the one hand, Europe is the venue of the greatest like Gothic cathedrals, the cathedral in Cologne, the Chartres Cathedral. I mean, it's just unbelievable beauty in these cathedrals. But also then segue to every single modern Catholic church built in Germany, in France, even in
Right.
Italy. And what you find is that they all pursue a brutalist, minimalist architect. You see this everywhere, a kind of cubist
Yep. Yep.
approach
Yep.
to
Yep. Yep.
altars and
Yeah.
ornamentation. Everything is, it's like almost like an iconoclastic
Yeah.
element. And to me, the point to that is to emphasize a certain apophaticism.
That's right.
It's a runaway apophaticism,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
it is an encouragement to go into the interior of your soul to find God and to not look outward to the world of sacrament and image and stained glass and so forth. And and as you well know, I mean, apophaticism, there's a legitimate role for that to play within the
Yeah.
Catholic spiritual life. Absolutely. That we have to always remember that God is bigger than any image we might see.
Uh,
Comprehendis non est Deus. You can comprehend it's not God. That's St. Augustine. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But
yeah.
the Catholic apophatic element is simply a corrective moment within a broader
That's right.
cataphatic sacramentalism,
Right.
okay, to remind us that whatever sacrament is coming our way, that God is also not only communicating himself to us in that sacrament, but transcending the sacrament and transporting us beyond, but through the sacrament, not in spite of it, through it, through the
Right.
concrete.
Yeah.
Whereas the
I
brutalist,
really, this
minimalist
is,
architecture is designed to do the opposite.
yeah, this is such a good point. This notion of the, as you say, the real and ultimate role of the apathetic, right? A kind of emptying out or a sort of a negation, yeah.
Yes.
But to pretend that now we're finally at the point where we can kind of get rid of all this incarnate reality. I mean, this is again another character in Lewis's That Hideous Strength is the short, fat Italian scientist Philostrato. And Philostrato dreams of a world, of a completely inorganic world,
Yeah.
in which hygiene is the sort of the high good, in which we scrape away all this messy humanity of birth and death, and all we just get rid of all of these things, and it's pure idea. And I think it's really dangerous when you mistake the apophatic with a kind of hyper privileging of idea over matter, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It's a curious kind of death work there, it seems to me, because they've taken an idea which is really important and have actually flipped it on its head and used it as a way of distancing humanity from God and from our own sense of destiny. Very
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
I hadn't thought
Yeah,
about that.
yeah, and there's a deconstructive element as
Yeah,
well.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
It's not
yeah,
just
yeah.
an apophatic moment. One of
Right.
the points to brutalist minimalist ecclesial architecture is to deconstruct what came
That's right.
before.
Right. Because that aesthetic smuggles a theology. It smuggles
Yes,
a philosophy. It
yes,
smuggles a worldview, and it's not just clean, right? It's not just like it's something much more profound, and I would argue dark. I would argue anti-human, unhuman,
that's
in
right.
that Louisian
Yes,
sense. So no, I think
yes,
that's exactly right.
absolutely. It's very anti-human. We're going to get rid of the images of the saints in the stained
Right,
glass. We're going
right,
to get rid of the
right.
statues. We're going to get
Yeah,
rid of the ornamentation
yeah.
in the
Of
architecture.
course, we're
Uh,
just going to abstract ourselves away from our own humanity,
yes, we're going to
but
chisel
again,
away the gargoyles.
yeah, so this is more of the sort of the immanentization of the anti-Christian eschaton, right? In the
Yeah,
guise of,
yeah,
well, we're finally ready for and that's again going back to this whole question about McElroy and his ilk. I just I have to ask the question, do they think they're really ushering in the golden age, or is there something more sinister at play, consciously or unconsciously? I don't think it matters ultimately. Well, it certainly matters for them and their own souls. But I just get the sense that there's a sinister engine behind those faces.
oh, I
Again,
agree. I mean,
conscious or unconscious, I don't know.
I like my own personal opinion is I think Robert McElroy is probably a very fine person, a good human being, a sincere person. I think he actually believes what he says. I don't get a sense that he's filled with all kinds of nefarious motives. I just think that he's shallow and wrong and
Oh,
doesn't understand the full atheistic implications of the views that he holds. Now, I think other prelates are nefarious, and I'm not going to
yeah,
name names,
yeah.
especially the predatory, like a McCarrick, I think was absolutely a nefarious agent who knew damn well that he didn't believe a thing,
Right.
and was simply using his position for various things.
Well,
Now
as I
we know
said,
what those things
a
were.
powerful legacy institution,
Yeah,
which gives you all kinds of
yeah.
latent powers. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So that's why I do come down hard on the idea of a sort of latent de facto atheism embedded in the ideology. That does at least allow me to back away and say, hey, look, I'm not going to accuse any particular
Yeah,
person
yeah,
of having,
yeah.
but I agree with you in theory. I think
Yeah,
we have to acknowledge that for many of them, there has to be a moment where they realize, you know what? I don't believe a damn thing about this shit anymore.
right,
You
right,
know, I
right,
don't believe a thing
right,
about this anymore, but I'm 65 years old.
right. I'm gonna
I'm
ride
a
this out.
priest,
Yeah,
bishop. I got 3 square meals a day and a roof over my head. And I can use
yeah,
this. I love this phrase of yours. I can use this legacy institution to help promote various causes that I do believe in.
right. Yeah, my old professor used to call that the three hots and a cot model.
Oh, I love that. The three hots and a cot model. Yeah. Yeah, because you sometimes, I especially feel that's the way about like a lot of older nuns that you see
Sure,
out there,
sure.
and the views that they express are clearly
Yeah,
completely
right,
un-Catholic. Their
right.
ecclesiology is not just Protestant, it's low church Protestant.
Yeah,
And you ask
yeah,
yourself the question, why are you even still
yeah,
in this church? And you're,
yeah,
okay, three
yeah.
hots and a cot. I like that. Yeah.
Sunk costs, right? I mean, I put 40 years into this institution and I don't even believe it anymore, but what the heck else am I going to do?
Well, there's also, though, the element, don't discount there's a sort of narcissistic element here, the
Mm,
element of platforming. So, for example, you see like a lot of these women that have gotten themselves so-called ordained Catholic priests.
yeah,
They're part of
yeah,
the women priest movement. And then
yeah,
they get interviewed in the Washington Post and the New York Times and blah, 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 blah. And then inevitably somebody will ask them the question, well, why don't you just become an Episcopalian or an Anglican, become
right.
or a Lutheran minister? And they say, oh, because I was raised a Catholic and it's in my blood, and I want to stay inside this church and fight for justice in this. No,
Right.
translation, I have a platform in
Yeah,
this church that gives me visibility as a
right.
renegade and a dissident, and now I'm a courageous hero in the eyes of the Washington Post. Whereas if
Right.
I became an Episcopalian priestess, I'm just one more run-of-the-mill lesbian
Yeah,
who's running a congregation
yeah,
someplace.
yeah. No. I think that checks. I do. Yeah.
Absolutely. But anyway, we've been at on that on that note, we've been at
How long have
this
we been
now for
going?
wow, about an hour and 20 minutes or so.
Love it. Yeah, no. Like I could
Yeah, it's
always
one of
go,
our
it's one of these
yeah,
days we should do like a let's go full Joe Rogan and just see
like
how
a
far
three
we
hour.
go. Yeah, big three
Yeah.
hour chunk. But these classes can that I have to teach can be a real inconvenience. And I might have to talk to the dean about that. So
Yeah. I'm sure you probably have to go teach here soon.
I do. Yeah.
Yeah.
I do.
So okay, so I'm gonna let you go.
Yeah.
But this has been a great conversation.
Always.
Obviously,
Yeah.
always love talking to you. And you'll be back on soon, I hope, and
Oh,
we'll continue.
please, I love this, Larry. It's always great. So thank you for having me on.
All right, and thanks everyone for listening. Bye now.